Sherlynn here. Finally, I've got this story put together, and I am excited to share it with you. I hope you enjoy it. It's called The Letters by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Yes, it's another Lucy Maud Montgomery story. It is a love story, but there are no children in this story. It is between adults. No, it's not that kind of love story. Remember, this is 1910, and the public domain stories are a little tamer, shall we say, but nonetheless, it is a very endearing story, and I hope you enjoy it. So without further ado, I shall begin.
Just before the letter was brought to me that evening, I was watching the red November sunset from the library window. It was a stormy, unrestful sunset, gleaming angrily through the dark fir boughs that were now and again tossed suddenly and distressfully in a fitful gust of wind. Below in the garden it was quite dark, and I could only see dimly the dead leaves that were whirling and dancing uncannily over the roseless paths. The poor dead leaves, yet not quite dead. There was still enough unquiet life in them to make them restless and forlorn. I felt sorry for the leaves as I watched them in that dull, weird twilight, and angry with the winds that would not leave them in peace. I was in the grip of a bitter loneliness that evening, so bitter and so insistent that I felt I could not face the future at all, even with such poor fragments of courage as I had gathered about me after Father's death. The emptiness. It was from that I shrank. I could have faced pain and anxiety and heartbreak, but I could not face that terrible, yawning, barren emptiness. I put my hands over my eyes to shut it out, but it pressed in upon my consciousness insistently and would not be ignored. It was 3 weeks since Father had died. My proud, handsome, unrelenting old father, whom I had loved so intensely, and who had never loved me. Father had never forgiven me for 2 things. I had cost my mother's life, and I was not a son to perpetuate the old name and carry on the family feud with the Frasers. If I had been a beautiful and spirited girl, I think Father might have loved me, but I was neither. At first, I did not think or care about my lack of beauty. Then one day, I was alone in the beechwood. I was trying to disentangle my skirt, which had caught on some thorny underbrush. A young man came around the curve of the path and, seeing my predicament, bent with murmured apology to help me. When he had released my dress, he rose, and our eyes met for a moment as I timidly thanked him. I saw that he was good to look upon, tall and straight, with broad, strong shoulders and a clean-cut face. He had a firm, sensitive mouth and kindly, pleasant, dark blue eyes. I never quite forgot the look in those eyes. It made my heart beat strangely, but it was only for a moment, and the next he had moved on. As I went homeward, I wondered who he might be. I wondered, too, if I should meet him again, and found the thought very pleasant. When I reached home, I stopped before the big mirror that hung in the hall, and did what I had never done before in my life, looked at myself, and wondered if I had any beauty. I could only sorrowfully conclude that I had not. I was so slight and pale, and the thick black hair and dark eyes that might have been pretty in another woman seemed only to accentuate the lack of spirit in my features. I was still standing there, gazing at my mirrored face with a strange sinking of spirit, when Father came through the hall. Seeing me, he laughed.
Don't waste your time gazing into mirrors, Isabel. The needle and the cookbook are all that you need to concern yourself with.
I was accustomed to such speeches from him, but they had never hurt me so cruelly before. At that moment I would have given all the world only to be beautiful. The next Sunday I looked across the church, and in the Fraser pew I saw the young man I had met in the wood. He was looking at me with his arms folded over his breast. If he were the Frasers' guest, I could not expect to meet him again. Father hated the Frasers, as did all of my family. It was an old feud, bitter and lasting. I did not look at the Fraser pew again, but outside under the elms we met him, standing in the dappling light and shadow. He looked very handsome and a little sad. I could not help glancing back over my shoulder as Father and I walked to the gate.
So, Alan Fraser has come home.
Alan Fraser? I repeated, with a strange, horrible chill coming over me like a shadow on a bright day. Alan Fraser, the son of old Malcolm Fraser of Glenallen, the son of our enemy. He had been living since childhood with his dead mother's people. And this was he. Something that stung and smarted in my eyes might have turned to tears if Father had not been looking down at me.
Yes, didn't you see him in his father's pew, Isabel? But I forgot, you are a model young woman. Odd that the men never liked the model young women. Curse old Malcolm Fraser. What right has he to have a son like that when I have nothing but an ordinary girl? Remember, Isabel, that if you ever meet that young man, you are not to speak to or look at him, or even intimate that you are aware of his existence. He is your enemy and the enemy of your family.
One day they brought Father in, white-lipped and groaning. His mare had thrown him, and he was never to walk again, although he lived for 5 years. Those 5 years had been the happiest of my life. For the first time I was necessary to someone. I was Father's nurse and companion, and I found my pleasure in tending him and amusing him, soothing his hours of pain and brightening his hours of ease. It was my delight because I loved him. But now he was dead. The loneliness of the big echoing house weighed on my spirit. I was solitary, without friends. I looked out on the outside world, where the only sign of human habitation visible to my eyes was the light twinkling out from the library window of Glenallen on the dark Fir Hill 2 miles away. By that light I knew Alan Fraser must have returned from his long sojourn abroad, for it only shone when he was at Glenallen. He still lived there, something of a hermit, people said. He had never married, and he cared nothing for society. His companions were books and dogs and horses. I even saw him occasionally in church, and never thought the years had changed him much, except that his face was sadder and sterner than of old, and his hair had become iron gray. People said he had inherited and cherished the old hatred of my family, that he was very bitter against us. I believed it. He had the face of a good hater or lover. When it was quite dark, the housekeeper brought in the lights and handed me a letter which, she said, a man had just brought up from the village post office. I looked at it curiously before I opened it, wondering who sent it. It was postmarked from a city several miles away, and the rather peculiar handwriting was strange to me. I opened it and took out some written sheets. They were undated, and, turning to the last, I saw that they were unsigned. With a tingling of interest, I sat down by my desk to read. The letter began abruptly.
You will not know by whom this is written. Do not seek to know, now or ever. It is only from your ignorance of my identity, that I can ever write to you fully and freely as I wish to write, can say what I wish to say, in words denied to a formal and conventional expression of sympathy. Dear lady, let me say to you what is in my heart. I know what your sorrow is, and I think I know what your loneliness must be. I know how you loved your father, how you must have loved him if those eyes and brow and mouth speak truth. For they tell of a nature rich and deep. I know what your father's helplessness and need of you meant to you. I know that now. Life must seem to you a broken and embittered thing. And, knowing this, I venture to send this greeting, telling you that my understanding sympathy is fully and freely yours, and bidding you take heart for the future, which may look so heartless and hopeless to you. Believe me, dear lady, courage will come to you with the kind days. You will find noble tasks to do, beautiful and gracious duties waiting along your path. I believe in you. I believe you will make of your life a beautiful and worthy thing. Out of my own loneliness, I, an unknown friend, who has never clasped your hand, send this message to you. I understand. I have always understood. And I say to you, be of good cheer.
I was completely bewildered, nor could I even guess who the writer might be, think and ponder as I might. As for the letter itself, it brought me an uplift of hope and inspiration such as I would not have believed possible an hour earlier. It rang so truly and sincerely, and the mere thought that somewhere I had a friend who cared enough to write it, even in such odd fashion, was so sweet that I was half ashamed of the difference it made in my outlook. A week later, another letter came. I welcomed it with an eagerness which I feared was almost childish. It was a much longer letter than the first, and was written in quite a different strain. It began with a witty, sparkling review of a new book the writer had just read, and passed from this to crisp comments on the great events, political, scientific, and artistic of the day. Only at the end was a personal note struck.
Are you interested in these things? I think you must be. For I have seen you, and read what is written in your face. I believe you care for these things as I do. Believing this, I have written freely to you, taking a keen pleasure in revealing my thoughts and visions to one who will understand. For I, too, am friendless. Shall you have read this as a friend, I wonder? A candid, uncritical, understanding friend? Let me hope it.
They had been coming for a year before I began to reply to them. I had often wished to do so. There were so many things I wanted to say and discuss, but it seemed foolish to write letters that could not be sent. One day, a letter came that kindled my imagination and stirred my heart and soul. I sat down at my desk and wrote a full reply to it. Safe in the belief that the mysterious friend would never see it, I wrote with a perfect freedom and a total lack of self-consciousness that I could never have attained otherwise. The writing of that letter gave me a pleasure second only to that which the reading of his brought. When my letter was finished, I sealed it up and locked it away in my desk, with a smile at my middle-aged folly. After that, I wrote a reply to every letter I received, and kept them all locked up together. It was delightful. I wrote out all my doings and perplexities, and hopes and plans and wishes. Yes, and my dreams. The secret romance of it all made me look on existence with joyous, contented eyes. Gradually, a change crept over the letters I received. They grew more intimate and personal. A subtle, caressing note of tenderness breathed from them and thrilled my heart curiously. I felt as if I were being drawn into the writer's life, admitted into the most sacred recesses of his thoughts and feelings. Finally, a letter came, my first love letter, and surely never was a love letter received under stranger circumstances. The first words drove the blood to my heart, and then sent it flying hotly all over my face.
I love you. I must say it at last. Have you not guessed it before? It has trembled on my pen in every line I have written to you. Yet I have never dared to shape it into words before. I know not how I dare now. I only know that I must. What a delight to write it out and know that you will read it. Tonight, the mood is on me to tell it to you. Recklessly and lavishly. Never pausing to scrimp or weigh words. Sweetheart, I love you, dear, true, faithful woman soul. I love you with all the heart of a man. Ever since I first saw you, I have loved you. I can never come to tell you so in spoken words. I can only love you from afar. And tell my love under the guise of impersonal friendship. It matters not to you. But it matters more than all else in life to me. I am glad that I love you.
There was much more, for it was a long letter. When I had read it, I buried my burning face in my hands, trembling with happiness. This strange confession of love meant so much to me. My heart leaped forth to meet it with answering love. Why did it matter that we could never meet? That I could not even guess who my lover was? Somewhere in the world was a love that was mine alone, and mine wholly, and mine forever. Why did it matter to know his name or his station, or the mysterious barrier between us? I loved and was beloved. The next day, I went to town on business with my lawyers. Neither of the members of the firm was in when I called, but I was an old client, and one of the clerks showed me into the private office to wait. As I sat down, my eyes fell on a folded letter lying on the table beside me. With a shock of surprise, I recognized the writing. I could not be mistaken. I should have recognized it anywhere. The letter was lying by its envelope, so folded that only the middle third of the page was visible. Before I could reflect that I had no business to touch the letter, I had turned the letter over and witnessed the signature. I laid it down again and stood up, dizzy, breathless, unseeing. Like a woman in a dream, I walked through the outer office and into the street. I must have walked on for blocks before I became conscious of my surroundings. The name I had seen signed to that letter was Alan Fraser. Out of the whole world, Alan Fraser was the last man whom I should have suspected to be the writer of those letters. Alan Fraser, my hereditary enemy, who, I had been told, cherished the old feud so faithfully and bitterly, and hated our very name. I thought of the old feud and hatred. I thought of my pride and traditions. They seemed like the dust and ashes of outworn things. I took out all the letters I had written, all except the last one, sealed them up in a parcel, and directed it to Alan Fraser. Then, summoning my groom, I asked him to ride to Glen Ellen with it. After he was gone, I felt dizzy and frightened at my own daring. When the autumn darkness came down, I went to my room and dressed as the woman dresses who awaits the one man of all the world. I hardly knew what I hoped or expected, but I was all thrilled with a nameless, inexplicable happiness. I admit I looked very eagerly into the mirror when I was done, and I thought that the result was not unpleasing. Then the maid came up to tell me that Alan Fraser was in the library. I went down with my cold hands tightly clasped behind me. He was standing by the library table, a tall, broad-shouldered man, with the light striking upward on his dark, sensitive face and iron-gray hair. When he saw me, he came quickly forward.
So you know. And you are not angry. Your letters told me so much. I have loved you since that day in the beechwood, Isabel.
His eyes bore into mine. He held my hands in a close, unyielding clasp. His voice was infinitely caressing as he pronounced my name. I had never heard it since Father died. I had never heard it at all so musically and tenderly uttered. My ancestors might have turned in their graves just then, but it mattered not. Living love had driven out dead hatred.
Isabel, there was one letter unanswered. The last.
I went to my desk, took out the last letter I had written, and gave it to him in silence. While he read it, I stood in a shadowy corner and watched him, wondering if life could always be as sweet as this. When he had finished, he turned to me and held out his arms. I went to them as a bird to her nest, and with his lips against mine, the old feud was blotted out forever.
And that is The Letters. And I hope you thoroughly enjoyed it and got something from it, a little tear maybe, some emotion that bubbled up inside while listening to it. It was a little bit longer, but it was just beautiful. So until we meet again for another love story perhaps, maybe something else, we'll see. I bid you good day, and again, good love.